Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the internet at MichaelDukesShow.com and across the great state of Alaska on this your favorite radio station and or FM translator. Hello, my friends, and welcome to the program. It is the Tuesday edition. Tuesday. We are ready to go, jumping into it. We've got a big show lined up for you today. Now, normally Brad Keithley from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets joins us on Tuesday to talk numbers and beat you guys down, to beat you down with the truth, make you feel all good and, you know, oh, man. But he's, of course, he's in Scotland doing his thing with the whole Celtic music group, following him around, doing the roadie thing, the groupie thing. And so we thought we'd bring you a little bit lighter side stuff. Oh, yeah. So in hour one this morning, we're going to be joined by JD Tuccille from Reason Magazine, who's waiting in the wings right now. We're going to be talking about the Jones Act. He's done some more writing on this stuff. He's been following this pretty closely, which follows up with our conversation last week with Sal Mercogliano from the What's Going On with Shipping channel on YouTube. Rob Myers' discussion earlier, and, of course, more. This could be the answer to a lot of our problems, and JD is going to break some of this down for us here in hour one. In hour two, we're going to be talking with Chris Story about the Fair Tax Act, which is a copy of the Prop 13 in California that they're talking about, where he's trying to get put forward here on the Kenai Peninsula down here in the state of Alaska. So we'll see where this goes. This should be fun. Should be a good day today. We're all lined up and ready to go. But let's, without further ado, let's just get on with it and get down into it. JD Tuccille, senior editor over there at Reason Magazine, joins us to talk boats and shipping and more with the Jones Act, and he joins us right now. Hello, my friend. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks for coming on. As always, it's our pleasure. We guarantee you, we love it. So we're happy to have you. And again, thank you for all the writing you do over at Reason Magazine. Before we get too far along here, I just want to let you guys know that if you really want to stay up to date on everything that JD's doing, you can go over to reason.com and find one of his articles. And then inside every one of the articles, there's a little widget there that allows you to sign up for JD's weekly newsletter called The Rattler. And you just put your email address in there, and you get more JD in your inbox, and you'll know what to do with. He'll be popping stuff in there every week for everything. So it should be fun. So we're ready to do it. JD, you and I have talked about the Jones Act a couple times already, and you've been following this issue pretty closely. There's been a lot of big developments, including the reflagging of a French tanker by Crowley down in the Gulfport states to take stuff to Costa Rica, and it just, all these different kinds of things. And Alaska's going, hey, what about us? We're struggling here and more. We had an interesting interview last week with Sal Mercogliano, who's a history professor at a merchant marine, and who's been covering this for a long time, and he had some of the similar kind of ideas about reforming the act and everything else. But give us the breakdown here. You were writing about what Senator Rob Myers is doing here in the state. What's the overall status with the Jones Act, and how is it affecting us and other parts of the country right now?
Well, unfortunately, the overall status of the Jones Act is that it's in effect, it's law, and it's been law for 125 years. It's a nationalistic law that was intended to bolster the American shipping industry by requiring that trade between ports in the U.S. be carried out only by American built and American flagged and American crewed ships. And the problem is that even 125 years later, I think we've given this law, enough time to see if it works. Those ships don't really exist in abundance. And when it comes to the ships that Alaska really needs right now, which are liquid natural gas tankers, they don't exist at all. There are no American-built, American-flagged liquid natural gas tankers right now at all. In fact, there haven't been since I think the last one built was before 1980. The Government Accountability Office, the feds looked at this about 10 years ago because somebody had the bright idea of extending the Jones Act to exports of liquid natural gas from the United States. And the Government Accountability Office had to point out that no one has built an LNG tanker, at that time since 1980, still no one has built one, that they would cost 2 to 3 times as much to build as they cost to build them in Korean shipyards, and they'd be much more expensive to operate. So that idea went by the wayside, but you're still stuck with that law applying to shipping between ports in the U.S., and that especially hurts states like Alaska because of Alaska's specific situation.
Yeah, I mean, and this is what kills me about this whole thing is, I mean, of course, government, like you said, when they start talking about, well, let's include exports on this, and they were like, whoa, wait a second, we're crazy, but we aren't that crazy because we would, immediately we would be uncompetitive. And we've seen the trickle down effect of this, and it's not, we're talking specifically about LNG, but this has caused problems for many different issues around the country. But even if we just focused on LNG, the one thing that, we've been pointing out is, I mean, the New England states had to buy gas from Russia a few years ago and have it basically shipped all across. They had to ice break all the way across the top of Canada to bring it down through over the top because there weren't enough pipelines to get natural gas to New England, and they couldn't import it from the Gulf Coast states by tanker because of the Jones Act. I mean, it's not just Alaska, although we're facing some serious issues here and have been for many years. This is a law that is, I think, past its time, especially the portions regarding the I think it's section 19 that deals specifically with the American flagged, American built issue. It's protectionism at its best, and it needs to be revisited.
Yeah, this is a law that never worked. I mean, this was supposed to create a vibrant American shipping industry and to bolster it. And the shipping industry dwindled. And it dwindled because of high costs, heavy regulation. No matter what laws you pass, it's still cheaper and more sensible to build ships overseas and crew them with sailors from overseas and then engage in worldwide trade. But that really disadvantages American ports because the ships can't go directly between American ports unless they're American built, flagged, and crewed. This hits particularly Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico the hardest, but also you mentioned New England. And in the case of liquid natural gas, I mean, look, pipelines aren't getting any easier to build, again, because of regulation and all over the country, but in densely built parts of the country, engaging in eminent domain to seize land is going to, of course, infuriate people, and it's going to end up in court. So New England, you're probably not going to ever see too many more pipelines built. So that means you need tankers, and those tankers don't exist. So this is a law that hurts the whole country. And Alaska, of course, is feeling the pain right now because of the situation with the gas from the Cook Inlet and wanting access to the North Slope gas. But the whole country is suffering because this 125-year-old law that never created the American fleet of merchant shipping that it was supposed to create.
Right. Well, and in fact, and Sal and I went over this pretty heavily, but if you look at it, I mean, the amount of shipbuilding done in the USA has been almost in direct disproportion to the law because it started to plummet. I mean, we went up. This was passed right after World War I because we were having shipping issues, and they thought this was the answer. And it did spike then, and it spiked around World War II. But after that, it started going down. And today, China is now building 51% of the world's shipping, and we're producing something like 4%. So this idea that somehow this is going to protect American shipbuilding is ludicrous in the extreme.
It's insane, and we shoot ourselves in the feet. There are things we can do. If you want a shipbuilding industry, we can deregulate. You can make it easier for shipyards to use non-unionized workers. You can automate. I mean, there's things that you can honestly look at Korean, South Korean shipyards. How do they do it? They do it very well. I'm not sure I want to look at Chinese shipyards. That's probably not a model to follow. But the South
Yeah.
Koreans, yeah, South Korea is a free economy. They manage to do things very efficiently. The U.S. is has ossified regulations. It's burdened with unions that don't want automation, and that drives costs up and it cripples everything. And the Jones Act is not going to undo those costs. It's not going to create, after 125 years, it's certainly not going to create a merchant fleet out of thin air.
No, it's not. And of course, we've seen exceptions to the Jones Act over and over and over again. Even if we don't, because there are other protections. Sal did point out that there are other protections inside the Jones Act for mariners, and there's other sections. But even if we just reform the most onerous sections of the Jones Act, it would go a long way to doing it. And of course, as we've seen, there's been many exceptions over the years given for various reasons. I mean, this is this is kind of a crisis. I mean, this is kind of a crisis for Alaska specifically. Now, whether we can't decide whether it's a true crisis or if it's a crisis of convenience, but with 17 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, or 1970, whatever it is, trillions of cubic feet of natural gas up on the North Slope, you'd think they'd be like, oh, here's a good viable energy source. And maybe if we could get it from the North Slope down to the West Coast or whatever, we'd have an easier time of being able to do things for strategic reasons, not to mention giving Alaska the opportunity to burn their own gas. And yet there's been, pushback and kind of ambivalence to this idea that we should get an exemption for this.
Yeah, I mean, every time I've seen free market economists who argue against the nationalistic elements of the Jones Act actually called traitors by these nationalist types who think that somehow finally American shipyards are going to start pumping out freighters and tankers. That's not going to happen under current conditions, and I don't understand this clinging to this ancient nationalistic law that has never done what it's supposed to do. But the fact of the matter is, I mean, a state like Alaska, you look at this, I mean, that pipeline that was authorized, they're still trying to get funding for it, the one that run from the North Slope down to the south to bring the gas. Even if they broke ground on it tomorrow, it wouldn't be ready until the 2030s. So it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever to not at least give Alaska the waiver that it needs. The whole country needs a waiver. As you pointed out, New England was importing natural gas from Russia. That's not really a viable option right now, not the way the world stands. They should have access to a gas from the United States, from other ports, the Gulf Coast, whatever it takes. I mean, there should be shipping between American ports using the ships that actually exist. And if you want to help encourage the shipbuilding industry, as I mentioned, look at deregulation and making it easier to operate a shipyard. But in the meantime, you have to work with what you have. You can't fantasize a merchant fleet into existence.
Well, and one of the other suggestions was, because Sal had some good charts that talked about, when we were building ships in the 70s going into the 80s, and one of the reasons why, of course, was they were subsidizing the American shipyards, encouraging that building of part of the commercial and merchant fleet, and they were doing it. But we don't have the money to do that now. We can't just say, okay, we'll start subsidizing. We're broke. We're busted. So instead of trying to say, well, the answer is to give them money to do it, how about we just get some regulation out of the way and some of the stumbling blocks and some of the hurdles and make it a little easier?
Yeah, and also let's point out, subsidizing shipyards does not make those shipyards viable. It just hides the fact that they're not cost effective. If we start subsidizing shipyards and they start pumping out tankers, and the South Koreans are building tankers, but at market prices in market situations, all we're doing is spreading our excess costs over all the taxpayers. And you do that across industries, and you end up crippling your economy, which, as everyone remembers, the charming days of the 1970s economy, right?
Right. Right.
Well, at least those of us with gray in our hair remember it.
Right.
But
No.
yeah, I mean, subsidies are not an answer. So, I mean, if you really want to be competitive in the marketplace in the world, you need to have competitive prices, or else admit that you can't do it and then buy the ships from somebody else.
Yeah, which is a potential solution, and we'll talk about that here in just a moment. JD Tuccille from Reason Magazine is our guest. We're going to continue with him here in just a moment. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We return with more and JD Tuccille right after these messages.
Running on 100% pure beard power. Oh, also some coffee. We dip our beard in coffee.
Ha, nice beard.
The Michael Duke Show.
JD Tuccille is our guest. Reason Magazine is where he's at, a contributing editor over there at Reason. We'll change gears just a bit here while we're in the commercial break. It's there's some good stuff in here. JD, you just wrote yesterday about the Canadian problem. It's interesting to see our neighbors to the north are usually so conciliatory. Sorry. But they're I know they're mad or what. They got called on the carpet for some of the things that are going on, and now they want to fight back. And your answer is they should become more American. Give us a thumbnail of this here.
Yeah, I got to admit, I'm not entirely sure why President Trump wants to pick a fight with Canada of all places. His talk of annexing Canada and turning it into the 51st state, or more likely a bunch of new states, makes absolutely no sense. First, because Canadians, by a 90% margin, when you look at the polling, don't want it to happen. If you look at Americans, by a 60% margin, we don't want it to happen. And another 32% only want it to happen if the Canadians want it, which they don't. Second of all, if you were to add Canada to the United States, they're mostly going to vote Democrat, and that's not going to help President Trump. But that said, it really, really makes Canadians angry when you talk about absorbing their country and just making them be American, whether they like it or not. And they're talking about fighting back, which is natural. I mean, every country has the right to resist if a neighbor wants to try to annex them. Problem being that Canada's military is pathetic. They've got about 18 functioning F-18s. They've got 4 frigates at any one time that work. Actually, they were down to 2 years ago. And their armed forces, but basically by and large, are maybe the size of the New York City police force. So you're not talking about a country that's going to defend itself militarily, and their government has been actively trying to disarm the Canadian people for decades. Now, Canadians do have guns. They're better armed than a lot of Americans tend to think they are. Especially those who never reported the guns that they have that were eventually banned by the Canadian government. But by and large, if Canada wants to have a viable chance of defending itself, it needs to build up an actual military, and it needs to let Canadian citizens own firearms and not keep those firearms in central registry records where they can be confiscated by anybody who invades the country. I mean, right. If you're trying to purge the records while SEAL Team 6 is kicking down the door, you're doing it wrong. So basically, right. Canadians need to become a little more American in terms of allowing their people to be armed so that they actually could have a real chance of staging an insurgency should Trump ever actually, or anybody else, let's say the Chinese or the Russians, ever try to invade Canada. And they need to actually take responsibility for their own defense, not just piggyback on the U.S.
Yeah, no, I mean, and the thing is, they have been so reliant on us. I mean, they've been sitting in our shadow for so long and relying on our military to protect the borders of the continent that, it's almost like but in some ways they have been free riding on us, right? But at the same time, they need to pony up and do their own thing if they want to be a serious nation state. And I'm with you. I'm not interested in having Canada as part of the U.S. But if they want to remain serious about this, then they should pony up on their own end and get their own defense going on. And, their citizens should stand up and stop, gliding on the free ride that is the defensive shield of America, I think.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, at the very least, they need to carry their weight in continental defense, which means naval forces and the Air Force. And if they don't want the expense of a large military establishment, and I understand that, they could go, with the Swiss style, with a kind of a national militia or a national guard. but that would mean more arms in the hands of their private citizens and a little more self-reliance. But yeah, I mean, they definitely have been shielding themselves under the U.S. umbrella. Former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau told NATO about 2 years ago that Canada would never meet its obligations. It had no intention of meeting its obligations of spending 2% of GDP on a national defense. And I understand why, but now they're suffering for that.
Yeah, now it's like, oh, what do we do, eh? It's some interesting stuff. You should go read it. It's over on Reason Magazine right now. JD Tuccille, our guest, he's got that and more. He's talking about the signals breach. He's talking about all kinds of stuff. Go check it out again at reason.com and get signed up for the Rattler, which is his weekly newsletter as well. JD Tuccille, our guest. Let's get back to it. Here we go.
The Michael Duke Show. Seriously humorous with a pinch of intellect. Sorry. That is humorous. Here's Michael Dukes.
And we're back. JD Tuccille, Reason Magazine, our guest. We're talking about the Jones Act, which seems to have been the topic du jour here for the last couple weeks on the program. Lots of things going, are contingent on portions of the Jones Act if we want to see a brighter future for Alaska and possibly for the rest of the country. Well, not possibly, probably for the rest of the country as well. Now, we have seen some interesting developments just in the last 10, 15 days, JD, including Crowley, the petroleum company down in the Gulf states. They were able to somehow finagle a deal with the government where they were able to buy I think it was a French-built tanker, LNG tanker. They reflagged it as an American ship, now American crewed, American owned, everything else. And now they're taking LNG from the Gulf Coast states to Puerto Rico. And that's really all that Senator Myers is asking for here is some kind of single exemption like that, where they can take one or two ships and do a similar thing here in Alaska. What's the holdup? I mean, all of a sudden it's okay, except, we'll let this one group do it. I mean, have they opened the floodgates? Is this a changing into common sense, or is it more of a one-time deal? Do you have any insight on this?
This is definitely a one-time deal. And let me say, the Crowley situation is absolutely rich. A few years ago, when there was a move to repeal the Jones Act in Congress, Crowley lobbied heavily against it because it wants the Jones Act in place because the Jones Act limits the competition to Crowley. Other companies can't come in. What Crowley did, though, is it took advantage of a provision in a Coast Guard authorization law from 1996, sponsored, if I remember right, by then Senator Ted Stevens, of all people, which allowed for the reflagging of foreign tankers built before 1996 as American to serve only Puerto Rico. So this is a very specific carve out. You're looking at it, and it's so specific, that it was based on probably one particular conversation over drinks. And so only tankers built before 1996 overseas can be reflagged as American, and then they can only serve Puerto Rico. And that's what Crowley is doing, is they're shuttling liquid natural gas from the Gulf Coast to Puerto Rico, which is in dire need. And Puerto Rico suffers, if anybody suffers more than Alaska from the Jones Act, it's Puerto Rico. So this is definitely something that needs to be done, but it's a very specific carve out. It's nothing that's going to benefit Alaska, and it's something that needs to be broadened. But you can see the utility of it. You can see why you have the need for this.
Yeah, and the thing is that what kills me is that our interior delegation has been so because listeners will reach out to our delegation in Washington, D.C., and they'll include me on the emails, either on the outbound chain or when they get everything, they'll send me the whole chain and say, look at what, and the ambivalence or quasi hostility that I'm seeing from our delegation in Washington, D.C. is amazing. I mean, this would be one law that, if it could be reformed or repealed, or if we could get a exemption to it, could make a huge difference to Alaska. And they're kind of like, meh. They're not even acting like this is important. I mean, if Ted Stevens thought it was important enough to carve out something for Puerto Rico, Why aren't we seeing something like this for Alaska? Even if it was a similar type one-time carve-out, like I said, one large tanker, one or two medium-sized LNG tankers could get us enough gas to stay in business while we're waiting for somebody to figure out where the money's going to come from for this this pipeline that's coming down from the North Slope. Because, like you said, all things being equal, even if we started today, it's an 8 to 10 year process. This is not something that happens overnight, let alone where are we going to find the 60 to 80 billion dollars to build it, and who's going to want to pony up the money for something that's not economically feasible as far as return on investment. It's just astonishing to me that this is the reaction from our own delegation.
And honestly, this is because of heavy lobbying in DC. Shipping companies that serve American ports don't want more competition, and they lobby very, very hard to make sure that other ships are not eligible to come into the U.S. waters and then compete with them. They don't want that competition. Of course, the rest of us should want that competition. We want more ships carrying goods. We want more competition lowering costs. But the delegations in D.C., the Congress critters, are heavily lobbied by existing shipping companies that want competition strictly limited. And so they've kept them for 125 years. They've locked other ships out of the market, and we're all suffering because of that. Now, I'll point out that the right now the best bet for, or at least the greatest hope for investment to get that pipeline finally started, is coming from a South Korean consortium. So maybe they can start building the pipeline and also teach us how to build tankers at the same time.
I mean, that would be beautiful. And again, I definitely understand the fight from, cargo handlers and other things, but there is no competition for LNG shipping in the United States because there are no American-built LNG tankers. I mean, that's kind of boggles my mind. I can understand them protection, trying to keep their own interests. That's human nature. I get that. But the fact that everybody is so up in arms about, well, we could, not even the tanker. I mean, what? We don't even have one. We couldn't even build one right now if we wanted to. I mean, it's astonishing. Why is this not? And as far as ease and liability and all the bells and whistles and environmental impacts and everything that would have to go on with this pipeline, I mean, I think 10 years is a pretty rosy estimate. What is the alternative? Since there is no other option and there is nobody really to complain, I don't understand what the holdup is.
I think the holdup is the example that would set. Once you concede that there are no American-built LNG tankers that can service, that could travel between American ports, and if you allow that exception and shipyards start laying down the keels for LNG tankers, you're admitting that the law is not working in a major way in one area. And once you start laying keels, well, why couldn't the next keel then be for a freighter? Honestly, it should be, after they lay down some keels for LNG tankers. But it's the example it sets. They don't want to basically put a hole in the dam. They don't want anything cracking the barrier they put up to allowing an exception to any of this. They don't want anybody basically showing that the Jones Act isn't a good thing.
Right. Well, I mean, I think many people who analyze it and who've had discussions about it can understand it intellectually that this is not a great thing. I mean, but we're not the ones in charge. So if this passes, if Rob Myers' resolution, now it's a resolution, it doesn't really do much other than state the will of the legislature in the state of Alaska, of all places. But I mean, what do you think is going to happen? Is there any movement from anyone anywhere to try and get an exception or reform or any movement at all in the Jones Act?
Well, and this is a problem. A few years ago, there was an opening. There was a real move 3-4 years ago, 5 years ago to reform the Jones Act or repeal the Jones Act its entirety. We're at right now a very nationalistic moment in America, and especially in economic nationalism. This is an inopportune moment to be going and begging DC for an exemption to a nationalistic law like the Jones Act. It's going to be a harder sell than it would have been a couple of years ago, as much as Alaska needs this. So if I was, I mean, I don't know that it's going to come through. I think that this is going to be a tough battle, though.
Yeah, I mean, even if you support the president's moves to try and, again, with the national pride, the tariffs, the trying to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. and everything else, even if you support that intellectually, I can't see him jumping on board to say, oh, yeah, and we should now import tankers from someplace. I mean, he would say, build them here, even as ridiculous as that would be on a timeline or anything else. And the fact that, again, the only way you'd be able to do it in any kind of speed would be through some kind of massive subsidy. I just don't see him jumping on board and jumping up and down and saying that that's a good thing, because it flies in the face of what his entire message has been since taking office. Well, since his first term, quite honestly.
Yeah, I mean, this would be something that would go contrary to it. I mean, right now, we're in the midst of a tariff war with the entire planet. This would be a weird time for the president to admit that nationalistic economics, even something that has nothing to do with his own agenda, don't work. I honestly, I mean, obviously, the waiver should be granted by Congress, but I don't think you're going to get the president behind it, and you actually might even get him opposing it simply on principle, because it goes against the message he's putting out there right now. So Alaska may suffer at the moment because we're in such a nationalistic moment.
Senator Rob Myers is in the chat room, and he actually says New England has 15 million people. If their demand for gas doesn't drive shipbuilding, Alaska's population won't either. I mean, yeah, our little podunk 700,000 people in crisis is not going to make a hill of beans difference to politicians if they're going to let New England with their 15 million just hang out there and do it. And maybe we have to change the narrative. He said, we're playing nationalistic shipbuilding versus nationalist energy production. Buy Alaskan gas instead of Canadian. I mean, maybe that's the direction that we need to go. What do you foresee here as we wrap up this segment, JD? We're just kind of going to coast along on this. Is there any chance, or do we have to wait for this kind of nationalistic phase to pass? What do you think?
You know, it's humiliating, I'm sure, for Alaskans to have to go to a DC hat in hand and beg for a waiver from the U.S. government. But that's going to have to be pursued, and probably with more vigor than it's been pursued so far. The next step is probably to try to get more interest in the Cook Inlet. I mean, there's still gas there because, I mean, those are the options right now until somebody builds a pipeline or until that waiver comes through. So those are the two paths that can be followed in order to relieve the crunch that's coming down the pipe. It's coming down 2027, I think is the current estimate. You know, it's coming down very soon.
Yeah. Well, the problem is that anytime you say encourage more exploration in the Cook Inlet, they immediately look to the state government and say, well, then we need some money. We need some tax relief. We need royalty relief. We need something. And this is why there's been some speculation here on the program that maybe this is a crisis, or maybe it's just fortuitous circumstance where the single player that's really the main player in the Cook Inlet can say, well, we can kind of hold back and maybe we'll get some goodies out of this. I mean, that's really kind of the problem, is that one way or the other, there's going to be some kind of government booty in the deal here somewhere along the line.
And another problem is that where most of your drilling rigs are located that you would want to use is the Gulf Coast, but you can't use foreign ships to transport the drill rigs from the Gulf Coast up to Alaska to Cook Inlet.
Yeah, well,
you'll get fined. Yeah, you'll get fined.
They found that out the hard way the last time they moved a jackup rig from. I think they tried to take a stop in Canada and said, well, that was their thing. They ported in Canada for a day or two and then said, no, look, it was like $12 million fine or something for using a non-U.S. flag ship to move the jackup rig, which again, it's just the height of ridiculousness that this is where we're at, that you have to play these kind of games to get this stuff going on. And yet we've seen the Passenger Vessel Service Act, which is the passenger version of the Jones Act. We saw that get waived during COVID because Canada closed up all their ports, because it used to go from Seattle to Canadian ports and then up to Alaska on the Inland Passage. And they would get away with it because they'd stop in Canada on the way. And then once they closed the ports, they're like, oh, we got to do something. And so they waived it there. And maybe it was a different time, COVID, yada. But I mean, again, it just makes sense. Alaska's a little bit of a different critter. Hawaii's a little bit of a different critter. We're not just connected by a railroad or a highway. We need the help. And this just seems to make sense. Final thoughts on this, JD?
Nationalist economics, and the Jones Act is an example of it, dating back to another nationalist phase in our history. Don't work. Free markets work. And you want to use the ships that exist where they can be found. And if you want to build your own anything, you get good at it. You lower your costs. You don't simply try to bar outsiders from coming in. And that's a lesson that we have to keep on learning over and over again. So Alaska should get this waiver. It really needs it. But the Jones Act should go, and the whole philosophy behind it, the idea that we can build a wall around the country and have our own economy within it, and ignore the world outside and not engage with it, is ridiculous. We need to have a free economy that lowers costs, in which we do things we excel at, and also take advantage of things that other people excel at. That's how you build prosperity.
Right. It's a global economy, and there needs to be equitability. I did find one thing interesting that the president did, which he basically, in one of the sit-down meetings initially, he said, okay, well, how about we just zero out all the tariffs on all sides?
That would be great.
Yeah, and I think he was willing to do it. He's like, we'll just zero out all because part of his argument is they've got tariffs against us that are inequitable, and so he was trying to level the playing field and make the point. But he said, let's just zero it out, and everybody's like, no. Okay, so see, everybody's doing something with the tariffs, but you're right. If in a true worldwide free market economy, there wouldn't be any tariffs on any of that stuff, and it would be it would make for better choices overall, I think, in that regard. JD Tuccille, Reason Magazine, our guest. We're going to talk in just a minute here about some of the other things that JD's been writing about. I want to give you guys a flavor and a slice of what JD has got going on. So we'll return here in just a moment. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Dukes Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We'll return with more. JD Tuccille, contributing editor for Reason Magazine, our guest. Back with us right after this.
We're broadcasting live through a series of tubes.
Allowing all of these entities to provide streaming stuff going on the internet.
Well, it's kind of hard to explain. Sorry. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
JD Tuccille, Reason Magazine. That, speaking of Ted Stevens, there you go. The series of tubes is, our friend Ted Stevens. But, I thought that was really kind of funny because, Trump continues to take this kind of maximalist position on everything. I mean, he's the guy that walks into a room and screams, I need a motorcycle, when really all he wants is a bicycle, right? I mean, that's usually how he rolls, because he's a negotiator and he comes in from this maximum position on everything. But I thought it was interesting that he sat down and said, okay, well, how about we zero out all the tariffs? And there was a lot of pearl clutching going on. All of a sudden, they're like, oh, no, we couldn't, we'll zero out, as long as we zero out the tariffs on all sides, it's an even playing field, let's do it. And they were like, oh, no, we couldn't do that. Okay, so tariffs are good when it's for you, but when it's for us, it's bad. And, this whole thing has just been so crazy. But this, JD, is a historical lesson. I mean, this is a microcosm of what happens when you get industries, crony capitalism, working with government. It was the shipbuilders, it was the maritime unions, it was the shippers, it was everybody coming together when they put this whole Jones Act things together to basically Christmas tree the thing up so that everybody was protected. And now it's just languished this whole time, and you've seen the industry just crater. I mean, we were building over half the world's ships, and now we're down to 3-4% right now of all the world shipping. I mean, that's just, it's madness to leave something like this in place when we're in a position where we're at right now.
And this is an inevitable result of protectionism. When you protect your industries from foreign competition, they get lazy. They get less good at what they do. I mean, I think I remember how bad American cars were in the 70s. And that was because they had been shielded from foreign car competition for so long. And it was nice to be able to buy a Japanese car where the panels didn't fall off as soon as you took it off the lot. And that's because the American companies become lazy. When they have to compete, when there are more companies that are in the same market, they have to excel. They lower their costs, they up their game, they innovate. And this is what happened to American shipbuilding. I mean, the Jones Act protected, Americans. And then of course, we imposed more regulation and made it more expensive along the line, but we became uncompetitive. Our shipyards became uncompetitive in the world. And so when the shipping companies around the world went to buy ships, less and less over the decades do they look to American shipyards. More and more they went to places like Germany or South Korea.
Right.
And that's the inevitable result of this stuff. So yeah, when you see a law wrapped in the American flag, peel that flag back, and underneath, you're going to find out that somebody is protecting their own skin in the game. That's the way it always works. They're making a buck.
Well, and then it was exacerbated by the fact that then it was subsidized by the government for so many years over different tranches and over different periods. The last one being in the late 70s, early 80s. They were subsidizing that industry to the tunes of billions of dollars. And they're like, oh, look, yeah, see, the building spiked. Well, sure, you were paying for a big chunk of it with taxpayer dollars. Again, you were taking something that was already inefficient and inequitable, and you were just funding it and hiding the fact that it was completely outclassed by everyone else around the world.
Yeah, any industry that's propped up by government subsidies is going to look healthy so long as those subsidies flow. But what you want to look at is the quality of what they're producing. Are they competitive? If without those subsidies, could they produce a product that anybody actually wants to buy? And that becomes less and less the case as time goes on.
Well, and if you want an example of that, all you have to do is look at the green industry right now, right?
Yeah.
Now that all these subsidies have got, I mean, we've had story after just here in Alaska, we've had story after story of, solar farms are now falling apart and wind farms are now falling apart and everything else because all of a sudden they pulled all these federal monies and all of a sudden, the metrics just don't. We had to back out because the federal, because there was the metrics, the economics of it just didn't work. And the only reason they did work is because Uncle Sugar was there with the sweet treat fire hose, just pumping the money in there.
Yeah, I mean, a great example of that is if you looked at Germany, which shut down all the nuclear plants and has all these wind farms and solar farms, and they can't make it work. And why is that? Well, it turns out that you're from the North Sea. Solar doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, you're a far north country. The technology for storing that power isn't there. And windmills wear out really, really fast. So it's intermittent power. So they subsidized it for as long as they could, and now they're suffering. Their whole economy is suffering. I mean, they're shutting down their aluminum smelters because intermittent solar and wind power don't produce enough power to keep aluminum smelters going. So yeah, I mean, you're going to see that everywhere.
Yeah, and then some of the countries that did rely, I think it was France, relied on something like 80% of their power was from nuclear power, and then they started reducing, to come in line with the whole green Kyoto, blah 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 blah. All of a sudden, they started shuttering those plants, and now they've got an energy crisis. Wait a second, you guys had it licked. What were you doing? And again, it's the kowtowing to kind of that the green agenda that we see across the country and across the world. It just makes no sense. We were having a conversation yesterday about the thing that makes society work, Western society, and makes a society expand and grow is cheap, affordable energy. That's what does it. And if we can't continue to produce that, then we're going to have some serious issues. All right, JD Tuccille, our guest.
Public enema number one. Oh, wait, sorry. Public enemy number one, which makes more sense. On the other hand, he's a little bit of a pain in the Michael Duke show.
Yes, it's true. It's 100% true. No doubt about it. JD Tuccille, Reason Magazine, is our guest. Now, just in case you think I only bring JD on to talk about issues related to the Jones Act in Alaska and guns, which seems to be when I bring JD on a lot, he writes about a variety of other issues as well. In just the last week or 10 days, he's written about the Department of Education, of course, the Jones Act, which we just talked about. He talks about the Signal controversy with the Signal chat and encryption. And he talks about Canadian tariffs and why Canada should become a little bit more American in a lot of regards. So, JD, give folks out there who've never read your stuff a little bit of thumbnail of all the ones that I just touched on there. Give me a brief summation of what really drives you when you write, and what catches your eye, and why you covered these stories. Give us a little bit of a rundown here.
Yeah, well, fundamentally, everything I write about is based on the awareness that the government is too big, too powerful, and too intrusive, and that most of what it's doing, it ought not be doing. And there's a philosophical element to that, but there's also, I mean, our Constitution was based on the idea of limited government. So when I wrote about the Department of Education, I pointed out that there's actually no constitutional authorization for it, and I cited a constitutional scholar from the Cato Institute, who's the head of the Robert E. Levy's Center for Constitutional Studies, who said that without constitutional authorization for the Department of Education and for a lot of other elements of the government, the president actually has arguably an obligation to shut down the Department of Education and to phase it out. It will take Congress to actually close the entity itself, but that the president has an obligation, a duty under the Constitution to stop to start to rolling back what the Department of Education does, because it's not authorized. When I wrote about Signal, I pointed out that the government has been trying to intercept American communications for decades, that the Chinese are in our phone system and listening to stuff because the FBI insisted on building in backdoors over the years, and the Chinese used those backdoors. But that when we see American officials using Signal, okay, no matter how stupid it was the way they set it up, and inviting a journalist as a +1 to your secret chat about a strike on Yemen is not exactly a brilliant move. When you see them using Signal in preference to the clunky, really bad government software, it's an endorsement of Signal. It means that the software is almost certainly secure from government snooping, and that the rest of us probably ought to be using Signal and other competing software packages to keep snoops, whether it's the Chinese or our own government, out of our communications.
Right.
Overall, what we're talking about is that we need a much smaller, less nosy government that is not in our business all the time.
Right. And again, when we were talking about the Canadian tariffs, we talked about this during the first commercial break. I mean, the whole point here is that we've got government involved at every level. The Canadian government, the American government, everybody's involved. Let the free market do what the free market is going to do. You want to quit putting the brakes on the economies and hurting people and hurting consumers and creating all these problems. Government, in most cases, just needs to get out of the way. And I'm not talking about allowing toxic waste spills and all this. I'm just saying if a product is good and people want to buy it, they will buy it. If it's bad, the company will go out of business. That's how it works. Without protectionism, without tariffs, without all these other things, and the free market could work. But the problem is that our and many other governments continue to get in the way, to try and pick winners and losers, and it just doesn't work. We can see the examples are all around us that it just doesn't work.
Oh, it absolutely doesn't work. In my piece on Canada, where I pointed out that the Canadians are furious about Trump talking about annexing Canada, turning it to the 51st state, turning it to multiple states. I mean, it's always hard to tell whether Trump is trolling or whether he's serious, or at least sometimes it's hard to tell. But the Canadians are angry, and they're talking about defending their country. But of course, they don't have the military establishment to do it, and their government's been trying to disarm them forever. So even though they do have firearms, a lot of them are essentially registered, and that'd be the first thing that an invading government, whether it's us or the Chinese or the Russians, would seize, would be the firearms registry. Then you grab the guns. But I said, if they're going to source guns, if they're at this point they're realizing that they need a better armed population, one place to look is the U.S. I mean, despite our history of protectionism, and Trump is kind of channeling the ghost of William McKinley, who was another protectionist president, at the end of the 19th century. This is also a country with the U.S. has an amazing history of smuggling. There's a great book called Smuggler Nation, which documents how long and how prosperous, how vigorously the U.S. has engaged in smuggling, no matter how protectionist the government was at that given time. Of course, the smuggling picked up the more protectionist the government became. So the best source for Canadian arms would probably be Americans here who sympathize and, for the right price, be willing to run some guns north to the Great White North there.
Yeah, no. I mean, all you have to do is look at, the American spirit. I mean, Americans by and large are law abiding until they come across laws that are just stupid, right? It's like prohibition. What happened during prohibition? Everybody was taking a little tipple, right? I mean, everybody was, the speakeasies, the hooch houses, the booze joints, and of course, the prohibition rum running and the Canadian whiskey, I mean, we will reach a point where we just go this far and no farther because that law is stupid. And yeah, they should take a page out of our book. We've got to realize as a nation, and I think in some ways we are with the Doge and everything else, that government's gone too far. And we need to pull it back, and we need to make it more responsive to us and not beholden to the powers that be in Washington, D.C. And I think America, that's where the whole Trump thing came from. That's why this nationalist fervor, that's why it appeals to Americans, because they're frustrated with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's elements of the Trump agenda that's making me nuts. I mean, the protectionism and such. But the Doge thing, I'm actually very enthusiastic about. I'm enthusiastic, even though thinking it's an uphill battle and thinking the deck is stacked against it, because it's necessary. We have not had a balanced budget at the federal level in this country in decades. I mean, you cannot keep on running multi-trillion dollar deficits, adding to a $36 trillion official debt, formal national debt, which does not take into account the unfunded liabilities of Medicare and Social Security, which double the national debt. You cannot keep on doing that and expect the country will continue to exist. It will not. The Penn Wharton School of Business has a budget model that kind of competes with the Congressional Budget Office, which is the official one. And Penn Wharton says that they said in 2023, we had at most 20 years to bring the budget under control and to start working the debt down before the U.S. lost control and had to default on the debt, either formally by declaring it couldn't pay it back, or informally by devaluing the dollar and basically doing what the Weimar Republic did, which is by just running the printing presses, or these days the digital presses, and issuing worthless dollars to pay off debt. So there's a real reason why we need to slash the size and cost of government, and it's urgency. It's not just a philosophical reason, because they're good philosophical reasons, but it's because if we don't, the country will not exist.
Because arithmetic. That's why. It's basically because maths. Maths are hard. I understand, but it doesn't lie. And it doesn't care about your feelings, facts, over feelings. JD Tuccille, Reason Magazine, about 45 seconds. JD, what are you working on next?
I'm actually writing about last week's Vanderstock decision about the U.S. Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court said that actually a block of metal that isn't finished can be considered a firearm by the ATF. I'll write about why that's a bad decision, and we'll see what we can do going forward to make sure that we still can keep our hobbies going and make our own guns if we choose to.
See, we should have JD back on Friday. JD, you should come back on Friday and talk about that. See? Maybe we can abuse the privilege here and see if we can get him back. JD Tuccille, Reason Magazine. The Rattler is what he calls his weekly newsletter. You can find it at reason.com. JD, as always, thank you, my friend.
Thank you for having me on.
Appreciate it. Hold the line. Folks, we're out of time. Chris Story up next. We talked a little bit about Vanderstock last week, and I mean, it's an interesting decision because it was made based on the APA, the Administrative Procedures Act, and it wasn't argued on a Second Amendment grounds, which makes it a very interesting decision in that regard. But I still think that they still made the wrong decision. And so, yeah, I mean, I'd love to talk with you about that sometime as well. When's that article supposed to come out? Before the end of the week?
That'll publish tomorrow morning.
Okay. All right. Well, we'd love to talk with you about that as well here sometime in the near future. JD Tuccille. Thanks, my friend. As always, I appreciate all you do, and I appreciate all the writing you're doing, and thanks for keeping Alaska in foremost in some people's minds anyway. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. You guys take care.
All right. Thanks so much. JD Tuccille, Reason Magazine, our guest here on the Michael Duke Show. All right. Well, I mean, I wish we had a better handle on some of these things. But I think he's right. I mean, it's going to come down to I don't know. Whew. I saw Bill. This is Bill. I think it was Bill who said this is the best Tuesday in a very long time. That's what Bill says. Man, you guys give Brad such a hard time, but I mean, it's not like he's not just laying the truth on you. It's not like he's, it's not like he's not bringing the truth on you all the time. Sometimes the truth hurts. That's what it's all about. Frank says, you need to see my ghost gun collection. I mean, my blocks of steel and stainless steel. That's true. That's true. That's all. It's what it all is. See all this steel stock? This is this is the thing. This is my gun collection. All these blocks of steel in my machine shop. Jeffrey says sales of Ice Classic ticket ends on the 5th. Ice is 34 inches, low snowpack, warm spring, raining this morning. When did you predict it's going to go out, Jeffrey? I want to know, when did you predict that it was going to go out? Jeffrey also makes the point, if we were going to try and compete with China, he says it's hard to be competitive with China when they pay them with both a bowl of rice and a fish head a day. It's true. I mean, that definitely makes for an interesting, for a hard conundrum when it comes down to that. Just scrolling backwards here to see if there's anything else. Layla said something. I saw this and I didn't have time to call it out with JD, but because he mentioned that this carve out that Crowley used down in the Gulf Coast was put forward by Ted Stevens, and Layla says, bet you Uncle Teddy was working a deal for an Alaska carve out that didn't happen. I support your carve out if you support mine, and then the guy loses his election and Alaska is colonized as per usual. Probably not wrong. Probably not wrong. I mean, that's a good point. And that's probably what happened. Because why do it just for Puerto Rico when it's obviously going on here? All right, Chris, I'm going to call you back again because the damn thing didn't work. Hold the line. Okay. All right. We're trying to get Chris Story back on the horn here. Let's see if we can get this going on here. And come on, there we go.
No.
How now, brown cow? How are you doing?
Perfect. Beautiful. Purple
Perfect.
cow.
Perfect
Purple
cow.
cow's a great book.
It was a huge cow. It was perfect cow. It was the most perfect cow you've ever seen. Huge.
No. Purple.
Oh, purple
cow.
Okay, purple cow.
It's a book about marketing, of course.
Oh, of course it is. Of course it is. Is it a course about a horse? All right. You ready to dive into this? We're going to be diving in and talking about the Fair Tax Act, and we're going to get a full update, and then we'll save that final segment for you to soothe our savaged wounds and give us what are we going to talk about give me something to look forward to. What's the PMA topic for today?
The myth of the big break.
The myth of the big break. Okay. All right. So we know what's going on. All right. Are you ready? You've been enjoying the weather? Holy cow, my friend. I was sitting out on
springtime in Alaska.
Man, I was sitting out on the deck of latitude 49 yesterday having a cup of coffee with a client, and I was just like, wow. Here it is.
Well, you were 10 degrees off. You were 10 degrees off because it's latitude 59.
Or 59.
Still,
I'm sorry. Yeah, you know what I meant. I'm sorry.
Fine.
49, 59, whatever. I was somewhere.
We are in the 49th.
If I was at latitude 49, I was in somebody's backyard having coffee, and they were a little concerned. Anyway, it was
hands required in this establishment.
Exactly. But yeah, it's just been, man, it's just so nice. So nice. So all right, Chris, I'm going to put you back on hold, and we're going to pull you back into the green room there for a minute, and we will continue. Folks, like and share. Frank just said, I feel like we just cheated on Brad. No, Brad knew it wasn't gonna, it is what it is. Although it's interesting. I got a text message from some legislators after Brad put out his latest story on the landmine, talking about how we're going to make less money with more production. And they admitted that they hadn't run the numbers yet, but they were just convinced that Brad's got to be wrong, even though that they haven't run the numbers. And was Brad paying me to have him on to push his agenda? That was kind of the implication of the conversation. And I was like, no, Brad's a member of the Common Sense Corps, just like a lot of folks are a member of the Common Sense Corps, but he's not out here paying me to push his agenda. Brad's been a guest for 10 years on this program because I enjoy talking to him. But, you could just see the panic when some of this stuff, you've hit a little close to home. You must be over the target when that kind of stuff is fluffing people up. All right, we got to go. The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio.
Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the internet at michaeldukeshow.com and across the great state of Alaska on this favorite radio station and or FM translator. Good morning, my friends. If you're just joining us, welcome to hour 2 of the big radio show for Tuesday. In the last hour, we visited with JD Tuccille from Reason Magazine. Brad Keithley is out and doing walkabout in Scotland there, so we weren't able to talk with him. But we brought JD in, contributing editor from Reason Magazine, to talk about the Jones Act and some other stuff. A great conversation, and if you missed it, it's available wherever you find podcasts. I like Spotify, but you can find my show on any of the podcasting apps that you might have out there. So go out there and listen to it, or you can watch it on YouTube or Facebook. If you want to go watch the replay, you can do that as well. It was a good show, good hour, and go back and listen to it because there was a lot of juicy, good stuff in there. So let's do it. Tuesdays, hour 2, generally we kind of recap some stuff and then finish up with Chris' story for our positivity and life coaching boost. But today, since we've been talking with Chris on and off here over the last few months about his proposed idea for a new property tax plan in the Kenai Peninsula Borough, I thought it'd be good to kind of touch base with him and get kind of squared away and see what is happening with that. He calls it the fair tax, and it is modeled after California's Prop 13, which of course locks property values in at the purchase price and taxes them at that purchase price for the foreseeable future until the property sells again, and then it resets and moves on from there. And so we've asked him to come on board this morning to give us an update and talk with us about that for the first couple segments of the show this morning, and then we'll get into some positivity, because we can't end a Tuesday without a positive Chris story, right? I mean, that's just how it is. So let's welcome to the program Chris Story, the man from Homer. He can be heard every Tuesday and Thursday on KGTL and KPEN here on the peninsula. And of course, you can hear him at ilovehomeralaska.com. That's where his podcasts reside, and all the audio and his books and everything else. And he joins us this morning on the show. Good morning, my friend. How are you?
On top of the world, Michael, as you'd expect to find me on this gorgeous Tuesday morning.
It's beautiful.
One of my favorite days of the week, talking to Michael.
Well, I appreciate that. I always love it. And in fact, I get a lot of comments when I wander around the peninsula here. And even before I came down, some people would say, boy, I love that Chris guy you have on Tuesdays. He's always so up and positive. And down here, people know you a little better. And they're like, oh, I love it when you have Chris on. So I love it. I love it. Let's get into this, Chris. You have proposed this idea of a Prop 13 like plan, specifically not statewide like they did in California, but specifically for the Kenai Peninsula Borough, to help with property taxes, because we have seen some outrageous increases in property values and things like that, and it's pricing people out of their home, and it's created some real issues. And you've been watching this and thought, well, maybe we could create a carve out or a haven for people who wanted to protect their investment and be able to live in their home, for the rest of their natural lives if they choose, without being priced out. And you created this idea of a fair tax, and you've been shopping it around. I know you've been talking to legislators, you've been talking to assembly members, you've been talking to the public, you've been arguing it out in the public square, you've been inviting people to come on and argue with you about it, people who disagree. And last I heard, you were pretty surprised that while people have disagreed in parts and pieces of it, overall taxation without representation has been pretty much a hit for you. So why don't you give us an update? What's going on with your fair tax, and have you ran into anybody yet who's changed your mind? What's going on?
Well, I took debate class a long time ago, and I love reading about debate and discourse and persuasion and sales and influence and all that. When you really come down to it, anything like what we're talking about today, it's important we start off on the same page. And so, to your point, yeah, I've had a lot of people push back. I shouldn't say a lot, a minority, but some people push back against not the platform that I'm promoting, but a possible impact later, like short funding government or something like that. But nobody, not one person, has been able to push back against or diffuse or refute the idea that underpins the entire movement, which is this one phrase. And so this is what I'm getting at as far as debate. Before you can even debate, you better know that you're on the same page. So putting that into perspective each time, here's what I would say. This is a one line. If you're making a movie, you come up with a tagline. If you got a new book coming out, you better have a one sentence phrase that tells people what it's about. Here's what this movement is about. And by the way, it's nationwide now. There's over 10, I think maybe even 12 states that are somehow, some way looking at something like this. So we're in this moment in time together with a lot of our countrymen. And this is the underpinning of it all. There shall be no taxation on unrealized gains. And if we could just say, okay, yes, taxation right now, property tax, basically around the country, definitely around Alaska, is based on quote unquote fair market value. And as such, that is a tax on a gain you've not realized. It's a wealth tax. It truly is punitive. It is regressive in its nature. If we could just agree on that, even though you may want the money in government, you may want the money for your government, you may want to pay your property tax all the way up to the moment they put you 6 feet under. You cannot refute the notion that this, in fact, is a tax on unrealized gains, period. I mean, and so nobody's pushed back on that, Michael. People push back on me or the ideas within the context of reforming tax on private property, real estate, but nobody's been able to say, here's where you're wrong. It's a formula that can't be proven wrong because it's just the truth. There is tax right now on unrealized gains every single day.
Right. No, and I think that's always been the thing that, I have characterized property taxes throughout my history in radio and having my own show. I have characterized it many times as evil. I mean, it is a tax that's evil. This is, for the most part, this is people who are just trying to live their lives in their homes. And in many cases, you never actually own the property. You're priced right out of the market in some cases, especially if you hit retirement and you're only making 50-60% of what you were making when you were a full-time employee, and yet now you're burdened with having to pay this until the day you die, and a lot of cases on things like you said that you can't control, like market forces. And it's not like you're selling the home and making and realizing the money. I've often said this is, I dislike, of all the taxation schemes out there, property taxes to me are the worst in those regards. And you've pointed out why. The unrealized taxing of unrealized gains is horrific. Nobody would stand for that in any other area, but we become inured to it because it's slowly and gradually been put in place.
For example, yes, exactly. And that's what you just articulated is what makes this the most regressive tax possible, because it doesn't take into consideration your ability to pay. It doesn't take into consideration income or consumption. It takes into consideration only a quote unquote fair market value as deemed and determined by a very cloistered group of people in a silo that don't need to even prove to you how they arrived at the number. They do not need to prove to you.
Right.
And here's what's interesting. Now, often is thrown back in my face from those in the government is, oh, we don't have a choice, buddy. Boy, we just don't have a choice. We've got Alaska Statute 2945.110, which states we must, we don't want to, we just don't want to, but we got to do it. We've got to measure fair market value every single January and tax you based on that. Here's what's interesting about that. Peter Tuccille led the South Peninsula Hospital Bond Initiative, and he really championed that. That was his baby. It was going to be a $32 million bond mortgaged against our homes. And Peter negotiated a real estate transaction within that bond. Okay, within that bond, there was a $13 million real estate transaction. He, the buyer, said, I'll pay you, the seller, $13 million. And the seller said, okay, I'll accept $13 million. Michael, that's fair market value, correct? I mean, the least willing seller will accept, and the most willing buyer.
I would say that's pretty close to fair market value. If they had an agreement, then that's pretty much what the market will bear.
So the Kenai Peninsula Borough right now is in absolute violation of statute 29.45.110, because having achieved the fair market value in 2024, those three properties. Now, the financing didn't come through, right? But that doesn't negate the fair market valuation. Financing fell through because we, the people, said, no, you will not mortgage our homes for this acquisition. Thank you very much. But they're in violation of statute simply for the fact that they did not raise the tax assessed value on those three properties to $13 million. In fact, they went up 2.7%. And to my point, if all of our properties collectively across the peninsula had gone up 2.7% over year, I don't think we'd be having this conversation, or it might just be me having it alone on the park bench somewhere.
Right.
But the fact is, we've gone up 20, 30, 40%. I've had people tell me as much as 60%. Year over year, we're talking 80% in some cases between two collective years in a row. And yet here, Mayor Tuccille achieved fair market value on three properties, and yet we're not assessing them at that fair market value. So we're already flying in the face of the great statute with which we've built a hall of fame around, that we must do this. We've got to, we cry uncle, if only Chris, if only we could just not tax you at fair market value. God, it would make our day. Sorry, you're not doing it already. You yourselves, as the government agency, achieved fair market value, and now you're going to ignore the statute? Come on, we have to apply this fairly across the board. The only way to do it is to remove the fair market component, because that is taxation on unrealized gains.
I mean, absolutely. That is absolutely. And again, the hardship that it creates for people, especially in an area where people are planning to retire. And again, not everybody gets a gold-plated retirement. You know, some people, again, have scrimped and saved their entire lives, and their annual income could drop by as much as 50%. And hopefully by then they've paid off all their debt and they're ready to go, and they can live out the rest of their lives on that 50 percentile, and they're doing it. But if their homes, and you actually told the story of a woman who was in her 80s, whose home all of a sudden went up, can't remember. I think it was 50% or something. I mean, it was going to price her right out of her homestead that she'd lived in, for most of her adult life and was planning on dying in, because all of a sudden she couldn't afford it anymore because she was on a fixed income. And that's a fairness and equitability issue, especially for people who've paid their dues. They've paid their taxes. They've done everything for all these years. They've been a good citizen. And now the government's going to force them out of their house simply because the government decided, well, we think it's worth this much, and you really have no say in the matter. So pay up, or we'll send guys with guns to escort you out of your house.
And on her behalf, I was trying to negotiate with the powers that be, and this is a number of years ago. So different players are at the table now, but it's the same concept. And I was told, and I think this philosophy still reigns supreme with our borough, and that was she could just sell her property. She could subdivide it. She had a large chunk. She could just it's like she doesn't want to, and she shouldn't be forced to. I think a lot of us forget also that it was Mayor Williams, John Williams, former mayor of Kenai, became borough mayor, and it was in the early 2000s. And I should know this off the top of my head, but at some point he campaigned, oh, no, I won't be repealing the senior exemption. But he did once he became elected. And we went from 100% exemption for seniors in the borough to, don't worry, we're going to give you double what the state mandates. Not 150, we'll give you a $300,000 exemption. And then Assemblymember Bill Smith fought vociferously against adding to it the $50,000 exemption for your primary residence, but he was thwarted in that effort, and so now you do enjoy $350,000 as a senior on your primary residence. But that's not enough when your neighbors are selling for maybe $1 million, $1.2 million. And by the way, we don't have that many sales at over $1 million a year, but we have some, in which case then the borough is using them to then ratchet up the senior citizen next door.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, it's great when you paid, $350,000 exemptions. Great when you paid $250,000 or $300,000 for your home, but when that home valuation goes up to $600,000 or $700,000, and you're on a fixed income, or you're a family that has pretty stationary needs, and it's tough. I mean, that's a tough deal. And again, it goes back to fairness and equitability. We're talking with Chris Story, the man from Homer. You can find him at ilovehomeralaska.com. He is talking about the fair tax, and he's kind of outlined all the reasons why he got started on this. We're going to figure out where it's going now. What is the status? What are we doing? How do we support Chris in this move? This would be something that I would love to see the KPB do. And quite honestly, it's something I would love to see across the entire state. But we can do it here first. That's fine. I'm all about that. But I would love to see a revolution, a tax revolution in the state of Alaska, to say this is basically inequitable and unfair, and it shouldn't happen. We're going to continue with Chris Story here in just a moment. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio.
If you missed the show, you can listen to it on your time with Dukes On Demand. Oh, and it's free. Like America used to be. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Chris Story is our guest, and we are continuing on. Melissa in the chat room, Melissa, not the Melissa you're thinking about, but another Melissa Beth, says, my husband and I were looking at properties in Montana and found a $47 million 200-acre ranch. We were shocked to discover that the property taxes on that ranch are less than what we pay for our 2-acre property in Fairbanks, worth just under $500,000. I mean, again, the disparity across the country on all these various taxing jurisdictions is so amazing. But I mean, this is it. How do you price people out of a home, out of an enterprise, out of a, whatever? In the history of property taxes, Chris, and this is my understanding of the history of property taxes. Initially, when they first started doing property taxes back in New England, back in the early colonial days when they were trying to fund the government, it was, they would only tax the property on the yield or on the return on the property. So basically, if it was farmland and you had a harvest, you paid a portion of whatever the profit was from the harvest. But if you let it lay fallow, you didn't pay any property taxes. But that's slowly morphed. Like I said, it's incrementalism to where today people are like, well, it's just the way things are. Except for in California, they did something about it, and we need to do something about it too.
I'm sorry, Michael, I stopped listening to you. I was only thinking about how I could help Melissa acquire that $47 million rant.
Yeah, I know.
I just,
Serious-
yeah,
serious.
I couldn't hear a word you were saying. I just was thinking, wait
Yeah.
a minute, I need to get my real estate license in Montana. That'll take me a couple of weeks. Then I could
Yeah.
call Melissa. I could show to her. Yeah. So a lot was happening there, and I don't know what you said, but no, I'm
Yeah.
kidding. No, you're exactly right. Yeah, it's interesting because it does date back to colonial days. It isn't anything new, but it's the way with which the methodology, and then of course rampant increases in valuations, suddenly creating an uncertainty in people's lives, and that's not what we need. I mean, when you see the CEO of BlackRock is saying that he's seen more and more uncertainty about the economy than he's ever seen before, it's like, well, yeah, I mean, this is not the time to be stepping on people's necks and extrapolating to the nth degree. I mean, I got to tell you, 3 conversations in the last 3 weeks I've had with people where I don't do analysis for people to fight their property taxes based on what I think they want or what I want them to pay. I base it on reality. And we realtors hold ourselves to a very high standard of ethics. We have a code of ethics we abide by, we adhere to, we swear ourselves to that code of ethics, which would preclude me from doing some sort of an evaluation that would just advantage somebody against the government. So I don't do it. And I've had 3 occasions in the last week to tell people, yeah, they are wrong. The borough is wrong about your property. But that's, mass appraisal is very difficult to do, but you want to be behind the times. If you're a mass appraisal
Right.
practitioner, you need to be behind, not at the bleeding edge or where you get ahead of the people just because markets do fluctuate. But I had a guy last year, he'd gone from 6 something to 1.1 million. And from 23 to 24, I helped him. I said, I'm sorry, honestly, I think 830 is the actual number. Here's my report for you. He was denied all the way up the food chain, all the way up to the Board of Equalization, and denied flat out. And this year he's up at 1.4 mil. So interesting. Is that punitive? I don't know. They have no justification whatsoever at 1.4 million. But what's he to do? Next year it could be a 2. Where does this stop? And then come back to Mayor Machicki's offer and establishing $13 million of the purchase price. But then why the disparity? Somebody asked me tongue in cheek while we were debating and talking about this, if the assessed value was going to go up. And I asked Peter directly, I texted him, is the property assessment going to go up next year? He didn't reply. And now we know. No, it's not.
Of course it's not. Right. Which again, somebody points out, well, but the deal fell through, but it was an agreement. They had an agreement. It was the financing. Yeah. The deal didn't fall apart. They lost the financing, but it was an agreed upon price, which is fair market value.
Fair market value.
All right. Hold the line. All right. Hold the line. We're going to continue. Chris Story is our guest. I get a little passionate about this because this property tax thing has been something, it used to be that houses were not included. Anyway, okay.
The Michael Duke Show. Seriously humorous with a pinch of intellect. Sorry. That is humorous. Here's Michael Dukes.
Chris Story is our guest. I get so agitated about this because, again, going back to historicals, when you look at property taxes, it was never intended to be on your residence. Like I said, it was your fields. It was the land that produced. That was what was supposed to be taxed. And today, every home is taxed, right? Every residence is taxed. If you were a landlord and you had an apartment building, I can understand that. But if you're a resident and you own your home or you have a loan on it, it's yours. That should not be taxed. And it's just, again, it comes back to an issue of fairness and equitability. When I'm in my 70s and 80s, I don't want to have to worry about, is the government going to come in and force me off my property because my income may not be high enough and my property is appreciated, and they may force me off the property that I spent my whole life, trying to put together. That just seems un-American, in my opinion. Chris Story, am I wrong? I mean, am I wrong in any of that?
No, and that's why fair market value is the wrong metric to determine one's obligation to the state, to the government, to the people. Look, I think it's important to stipulate, and I'm speaking for myself, I'm not against taxation. I'm not against taxing. I'm not against paying taxes. I just want to pay a fair tax, and I want the same for you. We must stipulate right up front. Look, we want to support fire protection, police protection, emergency response, roads, bridges, air traffic control, education. Look, we're the first to say, hold on a second, why aren't we sanding the roads more often? Why aren't we? Okay, fine. We need to pay for this somehow. And as a borough, this is the mechanism with which we fund these endeavors. Got it. Another way we can do it, if we do lose, I'm doing air quotes, lose some income to the borough by a fair tax, we're holding a fortune. The Kenai Peninsula Borough is in the business of acquiring property, to the point of last year where we, the voters of the service area, said, no, we do not wish for you to acquire $13 million worth of more real estate, which will go off the tax rolls. No, thank you. But then again, in violation of the state statute, they didn't even use fair market value to evaluate those three properties with which they've already determined. So we're looking for something equitable. I want to pay a fair share, not more than that. We could start selling land that the borough owns today. We don't need a vote of the people. We don't need anything other than a decision to lead and say, we're going to stop acquiring and hoarding land. We're going to sell, put it back on the tax rolls, increase the pie, and reduce everybody else's burden accordingly. So it's not that complicated. It really isn't. Here's a question that I've been asked, and I simply cannot answer. And to be truthful, I don't think anybody can. I want to set up a hypothetical. Why should Bob Jones pay 10 times the tax that Joe Smith pays because Bob Jones has a nicer home with a view? What burden extra is Bob Jones putting on the government? What service is he consuming extra or extraordinarily such that he should pay 10 times what Joe Smith is paying simply because Joe Smith chose a lot with no view and a smaller home? It's inequitable. There is no answer to that riddle. There is no reason why Bob Jones should fund up to 10 times more than Joe Smith simply for a quote fair market valuation. So in its essence, this is wrong. And it is going to take, you said, well, how can people help? We all have to start having this conversation, not just with each other, but with our elected officials.
So where are we at, Chris? I know that you've had some conversations with legislators. I know you've had conversations with people in other jurisdictions and other boroughs, assembly members and politicians there. I know you've had conversations with assembly members here. Obviously, you've had conversations with assessors' offices and everything else. But where do we sit right now on this idea of a fair tax in the KPB specifically right now?
Well, and just to square that up just a quick second, I've not discussed this concept inside the assessor's office because my 25 years of dealing with not one assessor, but many assessors over the years has told me that's just not an appropriate place to have the conversation. The reality is they're tasked with a job. Their mission is to squeeze the nickel until the buffalo screams. That's their job. So I'm not going to discuss with them. It's a little bit like if you get pulled over by a patrolman and then you start arguing about the speed. Well, it should be 65 through here. Well, it's 55. I don't know what to tell you. Well, you hand over your license and your insurance and registration, and that's it. And you move on. And then you go talk to DOT or somebody else about the speed. And that's what I'm doing. It's like, okay, I'm not gonna get into a conversation with the assessor because it's irrelevant. It's not even the point. The point is we need collectively to be talking to assembly, as you said, and legislature and everybody else, and just really sharing this wealth penalty, this unrealized equity tax is inappropriate. So there is a draft ordinance that has been submitted. So I was on your program a couple months ago, and an assembly person reached out to me and said, hey, I like this idea. I want to be a part of it. I want to be involved. How can we do something? So we crafted an ordinance, him, myself, and a couple of other people in the Homer area said, well, wait a minute. What if it looked like this? What if the borough adopted an ordinance that said, and we just reiterate everything we're talking about in the fair tax, that would eliminate taxing unrealized gains. It would freeze your taxable value at what you paid for the property. Once you reach 65, you pay zero, a goose egg. You pay no more property tax on your primary residence. To your point about the apartment building or some other investment property, you'll still pay an apportioned fair tax on it. However, on your primary residence, you'll be able to live, quote unquote, rent free from the government, like no more rent to the government. You'll be able to live there until you wish to sell it, or you're no longer with us. That's up to you. And that's exactly what Governor DeSantis in Florida was standing up before the press conference a few weeks back saying, wait a minute, why should you have to rent your home for the rest of your life from the government? That doesn't seem fair. Touche. Absolutely. It isn't fair. And so where it's at right now is in review with legal at the borough. And I expect wholeheartedly that to be rejected based on Alaska Statute 29.45.110, and we don't have a choice. Oh, nothing we can do about it. We'll see. We'll see. There is a resolution on the table. Just so happens that it was just put there as a lay down, and I believe it's pretty new to the agenda. We don't know why or how it's coming about, but Mayor Machicki's put out a resolution asking the legislature to allow for a 5% cap on year over year, which is 2 years too late. Actually, maybe 4 years too late, but I think he's only been in office for 2. But if Mayor Machicki had put this in place and actually gotten somewhere with it last year, those of you who've received 20, 30, 40% increases this year wouldn't have. But at this point, all right, if you've got $1.4 million evaluation, don't worry. Next year, if this goes through, it wouldn't go more than 5% higher than that. And as a friend told me yesterday, if this passes, and it won't, but it's just a resolution. To your point, that's a very feckless document, but it's going to be going before the assembly tonight. And if it passes, you can guarantee, as my friend said, every year your property tax will go up 5%. Period. End of story. There's not going to be an enjoyment of 2.7%, like the borough did with the properties that they're leasing back from that property owner, which, by the way, if they increase the tax on that particular property owner, they end up just paying it anyway. So there's no incentive to increase the property tax there because it's sort of like a self-licking ice cream cone. But this wealth penalty, this unrealized inequitable tax on unrealized gains, I don't know how else to say it, but it's un-American, it's amoral, it's unethical, and it needs to change.
Ironic that all of a sudden the mayor put forward this proposal now.
On April Fool's Day.
I mean, that's there's some deep irony there. Somebody's trying to read the room a little too late on this thing.
Well, he and I talked about this last year, and I put out a program called Freeze the Squeeze in an attempt to help us rein this in. And he did mention, well, one thing I would be in favor is a cap. Well, it's been a year. It's been a year, and nothing's happened. And meanwhile, people have gone up 30, 40, 80,000 in assessed value. I mean, this is real money. So we can't leave it to them. It's going to have to be pushed by the people, power to the people. It's going to have to be in accordance with what we can do. If this state can pass ranked choice voting by a petition of the people, if this state can legalize marijuana to be sold on every street corner in every little town and in between by petition, surely we can come to some sort of a resolution, if it comes to that, as a state, that we reform our tax structure. We can do it. Wyoming's doing it right now, House Bill 282, or at least they're attempting to, and that'd be something to mirror. If this fails at the borough, then we're going to have to take it to the streets and take it all the way to the topmost of the popmost, as John Lennon used to say, and take it all the way to Juneau. And of course, my reluctance there is nothing gets done at Juneau. I mean, come on. It's just like, give me a break.
Yeah, no. And of course, as you mentioned, Ron DeSantis it seems to be pushing something similar to that in Florida. Of course, we've seen California, what they've done with it and everything else. It's not unheard of. So possibly something could happen, but we're going to need a lot of people working together to make it so.
Yeah, absolutely. Bill Smith is a long time. Like I mentioned him earlier, he was an assemblyman. He's been on the Homer Planning Commission. He's got his fingers in governmental pie for a long time, at least 30 years. He wrote a piece against this idea in the Homer News and the Peninsula Clarion, basically shooting down this idea of a fair tax. I think the title, if you want to go look it up to anybody, it was called Fair Tax, Oh My. And what's interesting is in that fair tax proposition, I'm trying to get seniors total exemption. Well, I got to thinking after I read that piece by Mr. Smith, I wonder how much he's paying in property tax. You want to take a guess, Michael?
I'm interested. No, I don't know. How much is he
Nothing.
paying? He's paying nothing.
Nothing. His property's assessed below the 350,000. So what's the problem? What are all you old people crying about? I'm not paying any property tax, but by golly, if you chose a lot with a view and you have a bigger home than I do, then you should pay your fair share. My fair share happens to be zero.
If he really wanted to pay a fair share, he'd pony up some money anyway, right? I mean, he'd ignore he'd ignore the exemption. I mean, he was against it. He was against the $50,000 residential exemption. He should, if he really truly cared, he should just pay for the full market value of what his tax should have been without the exemption. If he's really cared about it.
Can you imagine the outcry if Kamala Harris had won and she got through her plan to tax unrealized gains in the stock market and in the capital markets? Can you imagine the outcry? And yet here we are under the same structure that was rejected by all of America, including her most ardent supporters, I should mention. Every day we allow our properties to be taxed. It is forced rent to the government. Fine, I'll pay some rent until I'm 65, and then it needs to stop.
Right, exactly. Chris, real quick here, what can we do to help? I mean, it's in where you're playing a waiting game, but what can we do to prepare to help?
Yeah. I say if you can't attend, listen to the Borough Assembly meeting tonight, April 1st, and get in touch with every single one of your assembly members, no matter the outcome of the proposed ordinance that Mr. Baisden and I are working on, and or the laydown resolution by Mr. Machicki. Either which way, we're going to have to, let's see what the outcome is. And after today, if it's a no-go at the borough level, then we must take a full-throated statewide approach to this. And I think it could take a year, but we could also be optimistic and say, look, we're only going to give ourselves 6 months, but we need to make the change. It's going to have to come from the bottom up, not the top down.
Chris Story is our guest. You can find him again at ilovehomeralaska.com. He's been writing in the papers about this. He's been very passionate about it, and I am super happy to have him on to talk about this. The fair tax is what we've been discussing, and you again can listen to the Borough Assembly meetings tonight to hear what's being said about this and the laydown amendment or resolution and everything else. We're going to continue here in just a minute. Chris is going to change hats, and he's going to put on his life coaching hat. We're going to do a little bit of positivity, and we'll continue when we get back. The myth of the big break. That was right, Chris. Did I do that right? The myth of the big break.
You got it.
And we're going to be talking with Chris about that here in just a moment. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio.
Our light, our guide, and our trusted friend. Michael Duke Show.
All right. Chris Story is our guest here on the program. Rob Myers asked a question early on, and I didn't get to it. And I'm sorry, Chris, in the first break, I should have. He says, but Rob says, does Chris believe that his plan will lead to a skyrocketing in prices and a drop in home sales like it has in California? But again, I think that's a causation. I think that's a correlation causation. What do you say? Do you believe that your plan would lead to a skyrocketing in prices and a drop in home sales?
Skyrocketing prices. He must be alluding to the fact that there could be a shortage. If people are able to stay in their homes, they might choose not to sell as a result of that. In which case then supply demand, he's suggesting that this might limit the supply. I'm just hypothesizing this could be what he means. In anything that limits the supply could impact the price that's based on demand. Likewise, those of us that are enjoying, I shouldn't say us because I'm not, but anybody who's enjoying a 3.2% mortgage rate or a sub 5 even at 4.7 or a sub 6 at 5.5, that impacts their decision. Do I sell and acquire another home that I choose at 7.6% interest rate? So there's a lot of variables that go into the supply demand ratio, and as such, overtaxing so as to keep the market moving or to increase supply somehow by rationalizing that if we are continually to overtax or deny people the benefit of staying in their homes rent-free from the government. That's a risk I'm willing to take relative to that supply side of it. But we're also seeing a lot more building. And to his point, let's say that he's correct, that we could end up limiting some. My other component of this is government needs to start selling land now, increasing the supply, not just the supply of tax coming in on the tax rolls, but increasing the supply of land available for construction, because we are running dangerously low of private property. We have only 1% in the state. 99% is owned by non-private residents.
Right. No, and I think what you're talking about there is one of my most loathsome things that I hate the most, which is behavior modification through taxation. That's the argument. Oh, well, but if we taxed it, we'll keep the market flowing. And if we tax them, and basically, if we tax them enough that we force them to move out of their home, we'll keep the market moving. It's the same argument about taxes on, soft drinks or food or smokes or whatever. We'll modify your behavior. We'll make it so onerous for you that we'll modify your behavior through taxation. That's evil. That's just flat out evil. People should be able to do what they want to do, even if it's self-destructive, without the government coming in and trying to modify their behavior through a taxation scheme.
And I'll give you a case in point. A couple retired from the Valley, Palmer, Wasilla, I forget which, doesn't matter. It's one and the same. I'm just kidding. But they retired down here, bought a home down here. It was assessed at $620,000 or $625,000, somewhere in that neighborhood. And they knew, okay, we've got a $350,000 exemption. We own it free and clear. We've got X dollars of fixed income coming in for the rest of our lives. Okay, we can afford to live here. Within 2 years of their ownership, it was up over $1.2 million on assessed value. They are now, they've moved out of state. So I guess, Rob, I would ask, is that an effect that you're happy with on the supply-demand ratio? And I'm not trying to be obstinate to him. I'm just saying, to his question and point, is that a happy result? Now, that older couple brought with them to Homer a retirement income, helping offset our, buying goods and services, hyper-local. That's what senior citizens usually do. Spend their retirement dollars very local. They don't compete for jobs. They don't have kids in school. They're not putting undue pressure on any of the systems outside of what you might say as people get older. We rely more on medical care. What do we bring to the hospitals that are thriving and actually turning into financial juggernauts on the peninsula? Medicare dollars. What do we need more of? Medicare dollars to sustain these massive campuses that we're building. So it kind of works in reverse as well, Rob.
No, I don't understand the context of the question that he was asking. I should have asked it earlier because I don't think he's on anymore to clarify, but I definitely wanted to know. Frank says, if I give my property to my child under your plan, would they have to pay a new assessed value? And the answer to that is no, right? I mean, they would inherit your value, whatever your valuation is, that's what they would inherit, right?
Yes, exactly. That's at least the framework and the tenor of it as we've envisioned it. But, some people have told me that, hey, I'm really in favor of all this. I love that. But that familial thing, that's never going to work. Oh, okay. I mean, if that became sacrificed on the altar of getting a fair tax, fine. I mean, this is going to take some compromise. I get it. But at least that's what we were going for, such that you could choose to even sell it to a family member.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
And then they would enjoy that.
Then you sell it to a family member at whatever the value, there are ways around that if you really want to, if you want to get jiggy with it and figure out, you could make it work. But
I don't mind legacy property and inherited, benefits like that. To me, that's a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, we got to go. We'll continue here in just a second. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. Like, share, subscribe.
The Michael Duke Show. Not your daddy. Wait, sorry. Not your daddy? Ooh, not your daddy's talk radio. Huh. Whew. I was scared for a second. Thought we were going down. Here's Michael Dukes and the show.
All right, we're back. Continuing now. Chris Story is our guest, continuing with this, but switching his hats out. He's put on his soft Buddhist robes. He's got his gong out, his little saffron robes. Yep, that's right. He's got some incense burning on the side, and he's going to bring us through a dose of positivity and be our life guru for a few moments. His topic for today's life coaching segment is the myth of the big break. The big break, Chris. I mean, I think I know where you're going on this because everybody's seen. There's a lot of people out there who are kind of baked in a squat. Oh, I'm ready. I'm ready for that big break. I'm ready for it to just drop in my lap. But the real honest answer is, in my mind, you make a lot of those breaks. You're the one that makes it happen. But give me your thoughts here on the myth of the big break.
It's like the expression about, it became an overnight sensation, only took 10 years. The Beatles, for example, were performing in pubs and bars and street corners and in small venues for almost 10 years before anyone in America, let alone most of England, had heard their name. They were practicing and practicing and putting in a lot of hours of becoming who we would know as the Beatles, who once got their big break in America, became a global sensation, still beloved to this day, and maybe the greatest rock band in the history of rock and roll, according to some. And so it may look like there's a big break that happened for anybody that you see with massive success. But the truth of it is, when you look back over time, and the reality is, and we whitewash our own history sometime, even individually, and kind of forget like what you put into the development of what now we outside and from 30,000 feet looking down go, wow, you're lucky, or man, what a God gift you got in the form of your voice, or being able to write music or paint or sculpt or whatever it is. But usually there isn't one lightning bolt moment that makes or breaks somebody. It's accumulation of small decisions, intentional decisions. And then here's the crux of it all, that you act upon. And it takes courage to do that. It takes courage to write in a small laundry room after you've taught school all day. Your two young children are crying in the other room. One's got an earache. You don't really have the money to afford the amoxicillin for the ear infection. Your wife is exhausted and tired, and you're in the laundry room with the door shut in your single wide mobile home in Maine, and you've got an old Smith Corona, and you're typing out short stories on your lap with a board spread across your knees. And that takes a lot of courage and a lot of years. And then suddenly you launch with a worldwide hit called Carrie, because your name is Stephen King. But that wasn't a big break. He had sold story after story to men's magazines and to crime magazines. And he had worked his fingers to the bone for a better part of 10 years, college, pre-college, and then post-college, in trying to get his quote unquote big break as Stephen King, who we now know has published over 75 bestsellers.
Right. Well, it's amazing because it reminds me of that Thomas Edison quote that said, opportunity is missed by most people because it's dressed in overall and it looks like hard work. Right. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, they think the opportunity is just going to drop in their lap, but it is that incrementalism that you have to continue to work towards that goal. All of a sudden the opportunity arrives, and I think that goes back to mindfulness and fixing that goal in your mind and your subconscious, and manifesting those opportunities. You manifest it not just by thinking about it, but by doing the work on the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And taking a small step. It's a small step that leads to the next. And it reminds me a little bit of, and I talked about this on my show last week, but I just reread the book, The One Thing by Gary Keller. And he has this little demonstration that's actually scientifically backed. It wasn't something he studied, but it's something he repeated and is worth knowing, is this 2-inch domino theory, that a 2-inch domino can knock down a domino that's 50% larger than itself. And by the time you get to the 23rd domino, if you continue in that mathematical series of just 50% larger than the preceding domino, by the time you get to the 23rd, you're at the height of the Eiffel Tower. By the time you get to the 52nd or something, you're up to the distance between the Earth and the Moon. And it just talks about this staggering idea of compounding, not just compounding interest in investments, but compounding effects of your own small actions taken consistently And again, I'd repeat, with courage, because it does take courage to step up and say, I'm going to move forward in this direction. And may not make it in one step, but I'm going to keep moving forward till I get my goal, till I get to my destination.
So how do we avoid the myth of the big break, right? I mean, how do we make it work for us, I guess? How do we create our own big break in this regard?
Well, it's kind of like they talk about, the curse of knowledge. Once you know something, you can't unknow it. Once you hear this concept, then you go, wait a minute. Oh, that's a really great point. Evaluate anything you've done, accomplished, or achieved in your own life, and you look back and go, man, it was a series of small steps, maybe one big decision to start to like. So look, well, I'll give you my own life. I decided to become a realtor. I decided to become a realtor and abandon my art career and in move favor of real estate. Well, it took me 2 years. It was one big decision that culminated in a 2-year process to achieve that goal, to then spend the next almost quarter century working in it. So it wasn't any one thing I did, but one decision preceded a lot of small, very courageous, intentional decisions, which accumulated into a life that I love and that I feel is on purpose and with purpose. And that's what I think each of us are capable of doing. And if you look backwards, you've already done it. And some people might even accuse you of having a big break. Man, do you see what Michael did? He's about the radio stations. God, I wish I had done that. What a lucky guy. They haven't been with you since you were 16, sitting behind a microphone and talking and walking your way through a career that led to the position whereby you could say, yes, I will become the owners of the greatest radio stations on earth. KPEN, KGTL, K-Bay, and K-Wave.
I mean, it's one of those things where, again, it's incrementalism, and when it's on your mind and you're thinking about it and you're thinking, how do I make things work, and how do I do this, and how do I do that? I mean, this was on my bucket list, but and I was working towards those kind of ideals, but that's what happens when the kind of the universal lines and everything, your kind of harmonious thoughts all kind of work together, and you're doing the work at the same time.
Yeah, and rewards intentional decisions acted upon with courage. And it's that piece of the courage which keeps a lot of us where we are when we want to do something or go somewhere else, is we lack the courage. We lack the courage to put ourselves out there. It takes a lot of courage when you aren't necessarily a literary expert to put a book into the world. I was just talking to a friend yesterday who's getting ready to launch her first book, and I just I gotta admire you. I don't care where this book goes. I admire that you're willing to put your work into the world. And I think each of us can learn from that little dose of courage, acting upon something of an intentional decision.
Right.
It may not lead to that big break, but that's a myth anyway, because it's small acts successfully acted upon with courage.
Well, and small acts of faith, right? Because you have faith that you're going to achieve your goal. So it's small acts of faith acted on with courage, because
absolutely,
the good Lord helps those who help themselves. And so that means, again, that opportunity is disguised as hard work in a pair of coveralls. Sometimes you got to do it, and that's what it takes. Less than about 60 seconds here, Chris. Final thoughts for today.
I just, if I could just come back to the Fair Act tax reform just real quick and just say, remember, this isn't about no tax. It's about a fair tax. And I think that gets lost in the equation. We're not going to go from something to nothing coming into the government coffers. We just want it to be regulated and fair. And I think, honestly, the same myth of the big break could apply here. It may not be one big break that reforms this, but a lot of small intentional decisions that you and I take, acted upon with courage and faith, will get what's fair and what is fair to all the people.
All right. Well, we look forward to hearing how this all lays out and what's going on. And we're here to support Chris in this fair tax idea. I think it's fantastic. I'd like to see it statewide. Chris Story, the man from Homer. Thank you, my friend, as always. Appreciate your kind words and your advice. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Michael. My pleasure.
Folks, tomorrow we got more coming up, including Senator Shelley Hughes. All right, folks. Well, that does it for me today. Tomorrow, Charlie Franz will be coming on to talk with us about his censure motion for his censure motion for Lisa Murkowski and Gary Stevens. That's going to be coming up tomorrow. We're going to talk with him about that in hour 1. And then in hour 2, we're going to be joined by State Senator Shelley Hughes. So it should be a fun and interesting conversation tomorrow. On Thursday, Sarah Montalbano will be joining us in hour 1. And we're working on David Codrea for Firearms Friday. So we got a lot of stuff go there. All right, my friends, thank you for being part of it. Appreciate it. We will see you tomorrow. Have a great day.
We've shed our terrestrial radio skin, and now we are slimy lizard internet people. It's the Michael Duke Show.